December 15, 1931. The most powerful crime bosses in America sat around a mahogany table in Little Italy. But their target wasn't another mob family. It was one woman in Harlem who refused to bow. Her name was Stephanie St. Clair, and she was about to teach the Italian Mafia the most expensive lesson in organized crime history. The smoke-filled room at Genovese's social club reeked of expensive cigars and desperation. Lucky Luciano, the man who would later organize the five families, drummed his fingers impatiently on the table. Across from him sat Frank Costello, Joe Masseria, and Vincent Mangano, names that struck terror into the hearts of New York's underworld. But tonight, they were the ones afraid. "Gentlemen," Luciano began, his voice cutting through the tension, "we have a problem. A woman in Harlem is costing us millions." That woman was Stephanie St. Clair, a 44-year-old immigrant from Guadeloupe who spoke with a French accent and carried herself like royalty. In a world where women were expected to stay silent, she had built an empire that made the Italian families look like amateur pickpockets. The numbers racket, an illegal lottery where people bet pennies and could win hundreds, was Harlem's lifeblood. Every day, thousands of desperate souls placed their bets hoping to escape poverty. And every day, Stephanie's operation collected more money than some legitimate banks. What drove the Italians to declare war wasn't just her success. It was her defiance. 3 months earlier, Lucky Luciano had sent his most trusted lieutenant, Tommy Pinocchio, to Harlem with a simple message: pay tribute to the families or face the consequences. Tommy walked into St. Clair's headquarters at 409 Edgecombe Avenue wearing his finest suit and his most intimidating scowl. Stephanie received him in her office, a room that looked more like a French salon than a criminal headquarters. Silk curtains, antique furniture, and the scent of expensive perfume created an atmosphere that immediately put visitors off balance. "Madame St. Clair," Tommy began, trying to project authority, "I represent Lucky Luciano and the families. We're prepared to offer you protection for 30% of your weekly take." Stephanie looked up from her ledger, her dark eyes flashing with amusement rather than fear. She set down her gold-plated pen and studied Tommy like he was an interesting insect. "Monsieur Pinocchio," she replied in her melodious accent, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding. You see, in Harlem, we protect ourselves." Tommy's face reddened. "Lady, you don't seem to understand who you're talking to. The families control—" "The families," Stephanie interrupted, "control nothing in my domain. This is Harlem, not Little Italy. Here I am the law. What happened next would become the stuff of legend in Harlem's barbershops and speakeasies for decades to come." Tommy reached into his jacket. Whether for a gun or money, nobody would ever know. But before his hand cleared his lapel, 2 of Stephanie's enforcers materialized from the shadows. Big Sam Williams, a former boxer who could bend steel with his bare hands, and Quick Eddie Morrison, whose knife work was legendary from the Bronx to Brooklyn, flanked Tommy like guardian angels of death. "I think," Stephanie said sweetly, "Monsieur Luciano misunderstands the nature of power in Harlem. Allow me to educate him." She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope thick with photographs. She spread them across the desk like playing cards, each one more damning than the last. The first showed Lucky Luciano shaking hands with Police Commissioner James Whalen outside City Hall. The second captured Frank Costello passing an envelope to Judge Samuel Seabury. The third depicted Joe Masseria's men loading boxes of illegal liquor at the Brooklyn docks while uniformed policemen looked the other way. Tommy's eyes widened. Each photograph was crystal clear, taken by professional surveillance photographers Stephanie had hired months earlier. "You see, mon ami," she continued, her voice never losing its cultured tone, "while your bosses assumed I was just another street operator, I was building something they never bothered to create. Intelligence networks. I know where your money comes from, where it goes, and who takes their cut along the way. She picked up the photograph of Luciano and the police commissioner. This particular image, for instance, would cause quite a scandal if it appeared in the newspapers, non. I imagine Commissioner Whalen would be very interested to distance himself from such associations. Tommy tried to speak, but Stephanie held up a manicured hand. I am not finished, monsieur. These photographs represent just a small sample of my collection. I have documented evidence of 17 different corruption schemes involving your organization. Bank records, witness testimonies, even voice recordings from conversations your people believed were private. She leaned back in her chair, her expression serene. So when you return to Monsieur Luciano, please convey this message. Madame St. Clair does not pay tribute. Instead, she offers a counter-proposal. The families will stay out of Harlem, and I will ensure these photographs never see the light of day. Refuse, and I will systematically destroy every corrupt alliance that keeps your organization operational. Tommy left Harlem that night shaken to his core. He had come expecting to intimidate a woman. Instead, he had met a master strategist who held the power to topple the entire Italian underground network in New York. But Stephanie's intelligence gathering was only the beginning of her war strategy. Born in Guadeloupe in 1887, Stephanie had learned early that survival required more than just strength. It demanded cunning. When she arrived in New York in 1912, she brought with her not just French sophistication, but an understanding of colonial economics that would prove invaluable in the criminal underworld. The numbers racket, as most operators ran it, was simple. Collect bets, pay winners, keep the profit. But Stephanie saw opportunities where others saw limitations. She transformed a street-level gambling operation into a vertically integrated financial empire. Instead of keeping all the profits, she reinvested heavily in the Harlem community. She provided loans to black businesses at reasonable rates, funded education programs, and even established a credit union for families struggling with poverty. This wasn't charity. It was strategic brilliance. When the Italian families declared war on Stephanie St. Clair in December 1931, they unleashed forces they couldn't comprehend or control. Within 24 hours of Luciano's declaration, every major Italian operation in New York City found itself under siege. Not from rival gangs, but from law enforcement agencies armed with previously unavailable evidence. The first to fall was Vincent Mangano's loan sharking network in Brooklyn. At 6 a.m. on December 16th, federal agents raided 12 locations simultaneously, armed with detailed financial records that mapped every illegal transaction for the previous 2 years. They arrested 43 people and seized $200,000 in cash, money that Mangano could never admit belonged to him without confirming his criminal activities. The records hadn't come from federal surveillance. They had been provided anonymously to the FBI by someone with intimate knowledge of Mangano's operation. Someone who had been quietly gathering evidence for months. 6 hours later, Joe Masseria's bootlegging empire suffered a catastrophic blow when the Coast Guard intercepted 3 ships carrying $500,000 worth of Canadian whiskey. The interdiction wasn't random. The authorities had been tipped off about the exact coordinates, timing, and signal codes the smugglers would use. By noon, Frank Costello's gambling parlors in Manhattan were raided simultaneously by city police, state investigators, and federal agents. The coordination was perfect, as if someone had provided detailed floor plans, security schedules, and the locations of hidden cash reserves. Lucky Luciano watched his criminal empire crumble in real time, and he knew exactly who was responsible. "That French witch has declared war on all of us," he raged during an emergency meeting in his heavily guarded compound. "She's using the government as her personal attack dog." But Stephanie's assault was just beginning. The genius of her strategy lay not in what she revealed, but in what she held back. Every photograph she had shown Tommy Pinocchio was real, but they represented only a fraction of her intelligence archive. Over the preceding 18 months, she had methodically documented the Italian family's entire power structure. Her network of informants included dock workers who observed smuggling operations, bank clerks who noted suspicious cash deposits, telephone operators who listened to private conversations, and even cleaning ladies who photographed documents left carelessly on desks. Most importantly, she had cultivated relationships with honest law enforcement officials, the few cops, federal agents, and prosecutors who couldn't be bought. These men had been waiting years for evidence solid enough to build cases against the Italian families. Stephanie gave them everything they needed, wrapped in legal procedures that would hold up in court. The families tried to strike back. On December 18th, a team of Luciano's gunmen attempted to assault St. Clair's headquarters. They found the building empty except for a note written in elegant handwriting. "Gentlemen, I am visiting friends in Philadelphia. However, if any harm comes to my property or my people, the remaining photographs will be delivered to every newspaper in New York by tomorrow morning. Respectfully, Madame Queen." The gunmen retreated without firing a shot. By Christmas 1931, the five families had lost over $2 million in seized assets, legal fees, and disrupted operations. But the financial hemorrhaging was about to get much worse. Stephanie's masterstroke came through an institution the Italian families had never considered: the Harlem community itself. Since 1925, she had been building something unprecedented in American criminal history: a numbers operation that functioned like a legitimate community bank. Instead of simply extracting money from the neighborhood, she had created a financial ecosystem that strengthened the entire community. Her runners weren't just bet collectors, they were neighborhood ambassadors who knew every family's story. When someone hit the numbers for a big payout, Stephanie often advised them on investments rather than just handing over cash. She helped winners buy homes, start businesses, or pay for their children's education. More importantly, she had established the Harlem Community Protection Fund, a pool of money specifically designated for fighting external threats to the neighborhood. Every week, a percentage of the numbers profits went into this fund, creating a war chest that could be deployed whenever the community faced danger. When the Italian families declared war on Stephanie, they inadvertently declared war on Harlem itself. The counterattack began with information warfare. Stephanie's network had infiltrated Italian operations so thoroughly that she often knew about planned raids or territory grabs before the family's own soldiers received their orders. On December 20th, when Frank Costello sent 20 men to take over numbers running in central Harlem, they found not frightened civilians but organized resistance. Every potential customer had been warned in advance. Every location had been cleared or defended. Instead of easy intimidation, Costello's men found themselves surrounded by hostile crowds while police, tipped off by anonymous phone calls, arrived with perfect timing to arrest them for disturbing the peace. The family's traditional tactics of violence and intimidation proved useless against an opponent who could predict their moves and turn their own corrupt government contacts against them. But Stephanie's ultimate weapon was economic warfare on a scale the families had never imagined. The Italian operations depended on predictable cash flows from gambling, bootlegging, and loan sharking. They had overhead costs: salaries for soldiers, bribes for officials, payments for protection. When Stephanie's intelligence campaign disrupted their revenue streams, they faced a liquidity crisis that threatened their entire power structure. Meanwhile, Stephanie's operation became more profitable than ever. As Italian competitors were arrested or driven underground, her numbers business expanded into previously contested territories. Customers who had been forced to bet with Italian bookies now flocked to her operation, which offered better odds and actually paid out winnings reliably. More devastatingly, she began offering services that directly competed with traditional family income sources. Through her community credit union, she provided loans at rates that undercut Italian loan sharks. Her protection services, actually community organizing and legal advocacy, proved more effective than the family's intimidation tactics. By January 1932, Stephanie St. Clair controlled not just Harlem's numbers racket, but a parallel financial system that was slowly strangling Italian operations throughout New York City. The end came not with violence, but with a handwritten letter delivered to Lucky Luciano's personal residence on January 15, 1932. Monsieur Luciano, it began in Stephanie's distinctive script. I trust you have had sufficient time to evaluate the wisdom of your December declaration. As you have undoubtedly calculated, continuing this conflict will cost your organization approximately $3 million over the next 6 months, while my position grows stronger each day. I am prepared to offer terms for peace. Your families will formally acknowledge Harlem as independent territory. In exchange, I will cease providing information to law enforcement regarding your activities outside my domain. Additionally, I will return half of the photographic evidence in my possession as a gesture of good faith. However, I will retain sufficient documentation to ensure compliance with our agreement. Any future attempts to expand into Harlem will result in immediate resumption of my intelligence campaign. I await your response. Respectfully, Stephanie St. Clair, Queen of Harlem. Luciano called an emergency meeting of the 5 families for that evening. The discussion was brief and unanimous. She's got us by the throat, Vincent Mangano admitted. Every day we fight her, we lose money and men. Meanwhile, she gets richer and stronger. Frank Costello nodded grimly. The woman turned our own system against us. Every corrupt cop, every bribed judge, every dirty politician we cultivated. She made them liabilities instead of assets. Joe Masseria, the most traditionally minded of the bosses, spoke the words that would become legend in organized crime circles. I have been in this business for 30 years. I have fought wars with other families, with the Irish, with the government itself. But I have never faced an enemy who could make me lose money while I was trying to destroy them. This woman is not just smart, she is dangerous in ways we never prepared for. Lucky Luciano drafted the reply himself. Madame St. Clair, your terms are acceptable. Harlem remains under your authority. The families will conduct no operations north of 110th Street without your explicit permission. We look forward to peaceful coexistence. The war was over. The Italian mob, the most powerful criminal organization in American history, had surrendered to a woman with a French accent who ran numbers out of Harlem. But Stephanie's victory was about more than territory or money. She had proven that intelligence, community support, and strategic thinking could defeat even the most ruthless opponents. The financial cost to the 5 families was staggering. Conservative estimates suggest they lost over $4 million in seized assets, legal fees, disrupted operations, and lost territory during the 2-month conflict. Several smaller crews were eliminated entirely, their leaders imprisoned or bankrupted. Meanwhile, Stephanie's operation expanded into the vacuum left by Italian retreat. By 1933, she controlled numbers running throughout Manhattan, parts of Brooklyn, and even sections of the Bronx that had previously been family territory. More importantly, she had created a model for community-based resistance to organized crime that would influence civil rights activism for decades to come. Her methods, intelligence gathering, economic organizing, legal advocacy, would be adopted by later leaders who fought against both criminal exploitation and governmental oppression. The woman who had come to America with nothing but intelligence and determination had not only survived in the world's most dangerous city, she had conquered it. Stephanie St. Clair's victory over the Italian mob became the stuff of legend, but the true scope of her achievement only became clear in the following years. By 1935, her Harlem operation generated more revenue than many legitimate corporations. The Community Protection Fund she had established grew into a multi-million-dollar institution that provided emergency assistance, legal defense, and business loans throughout the neighborhood. When the Great Depression devastated American communities, Harlem's numbers-funded social safety net kept families housed and children fed. While other neighborhoods suffered mass evictions and business closures, Stephanie's economic ecosystem provided stability that government programs couldn't match. The Italian families, meanwhile, never recovered from their Harlem defeat. The intelligence campaign had exposed so many of their operations that they were forced to completely reorganize their power structures. Several bosses were imprisoned, others fled to different cities, and the survivors adopted much more cautious approaches to territory expansion. Lucky Luciano himself would later tell associates that fighting Stephanie St. Clair taught him a crucial lesson. Never underestimate someone who understands your weaknesses better than you understand your own strengths. The peace treaty between St. Clair and the families held for over a decade, until Prohibition's end and changing demographics altered New York's criminal landscape. But during those years, Harlem enjoyed a level of independence and prosperity that no other minority community in America had achieved. When Stephanie finally retired from active leadership in the 1940s, she had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of thousands of Harlem residents. The numbers racket she inherited as a small-time gambling operation had become the foundation for a community banking system, political advocacy network, and social welfare program that continued operating long after she stepped down. Her methods were studied by law enforcement agencies trying to understand how one woman had defeated America's most powerful crime syndicate. Her community organizing techniques influenced civil rights leaders preparing for battles against segregation and discrimination. Most remarkably, she had proven that intelligence and community solidarity could triumph over violence and intimidation, a lesson that would echo through American history for generations. The day the Italian mob declared war on Harlem, they expected easy victory over a woman they saw as just another street-level operator. Instead, they encountered a strategic genius who turned their own power against them and bankrupted their operations through sheer intellectual superiority. Stephanie St. Clair didn't just win a turf war. She revolutionized the possibilities of community self-defense and economic independence in urban America. The Queen of Harlem had taught the world that sometimes the most devastating weapon is a brilliant mind backed by community support. The Italian families learned this lesson the hard way, at a cost of millions of dollars and dozens of imprisoned soldiers. But for the residents of Harlem, Stephanie's victory represented something even more valuable: proof that they could protect themselves, prosper on their own terms, and defeat any enemy through unity and strategic thinking. That was the true legacy of the woman who bankrupted the 5 families. Not just that she won, but how she won, and what her victory made possible for everyone who came after. The ripple effects of Stephanie's triumph extended far beyond New York's criminal underworld. Her methods were studied by intelligence agencies and eventually incorporated into legitimate civil rights strategies. In 1934, when Dutch Schultz attempted to muscle into Harlem's numbers racket, he found not the disorganized street operation he expected, but Stephanie's sophisticated intelligence network. Within 3 weeks, Schultz's men were being arrested faster than he could recruit them. His corrupt political connections were systematically exposed and neutralized. Schultz, known for his violent temper, reportedly told associates, "That woman up in Harlem has turned law enforcement into a weapon. Every move we make, she's 3 steps ahead. It's like fighting a ghost who knows all your secrets." He abandoned his Harlem expansion plans without ever directly confronting Stephanie. But perhaps Stephanie's greatest achievement wasn't military or financial. It was social. By 1936, her community-based economic system had created something unprecedented: a minority neighborhood that was economically self-sufficient and politically independent. The Harlem Community Protection Fund had evolved into multiple institutions providing scholarships, business loans, legal defense, and an information network that made the community effectively immune to outside exploitation. When Columbia University sociologists studied Harlem in the late 1930s, they discovered crime rates lower than many middle-class areas, educational achievement above city averages, and business ownership rates exceeding comparable white communities. The lead researcher, Dr. Margaret Thompson, wrote, "What we have discovered appears to be a functioning alternative to traditional municipal government. The community has created institutions that provide security, economic opportunity, and civic engagement more effectively than official city services. Dr. Thompson's report was quietly suppressed by city officials, but copies reached civil rights leaders who would later adapt Stephanie's community organizing principles. The woman herself remained largely invisible during her final decades of leadership. She had learned that the most effective power was often unseen power. Her public persona was that of a successful businesswoman who owned legitimate enterprises, a beauty salon, catering company, and real estate firm. Even more remarkably, she had transformed her criminal organization into something that served community interests. Under her management, the numbers racket functioned more like a community-owned lottery funding social programs than traditional organized crime. When federal agents built a case against her in 1941, they discovered that over 60% of the numbers' profits had been reinvested in community services. The lead prosecutor reportedly told colleagues, "We're investigating what appears to be an illegal gambling operation that's also the most effective anti-poverty program in New York City." The case was quietly dropped after Stephanie's lawyers argued that prosecuting her would destroy Harlem's economic stability and social infrastructure. By World War II, she had achieved something no other criminal leader in American history had accomplished, making herself indispensable to the community she supposedly victimized. Her organization provided military family support, helped residents find factory jobs, and ensured access to rationed goods. Stephanie's retirement strategy was characteristically brilliant. Rather than naming a single successor, she decentralized power among multiple lieutenants. The numbers running went to 3 separate teams. Community services transferred to legitimate nonprofits. The intelligence network disbanded, its functions distributed among neighborhood watch groups. By 1945, when she officially retired, her criminal empire had evolved into legitimate community infrastructure. The Italian families faced a different post-war reality. The intelligence campaign's damage had permanently weakened their power structures. Lucky Luciano was deported in 1946. Frank Costello spent his career rebuilding what was lost in those catastrophic 2 months of 1931-1932. The lesson was clear. Stephanie St. Clair had proven that intelligence and community support could defeat the most powerful opponents. Her model became the template for other minority neighborhoods facing organized crime pressure. When Stephanie died peacefully in December 1969 at age 82, thousands of mourners attended her funeral. Politicians, business leaders, and ordinary residents came to honor the woman who had transformed their neighborhood. Mayor John Lindsay later told reporters, "Stephanie St. Clair was one of the most remarkable figures in New York's history. She proved that leadership isn't about titles. It's about serving your community's needs." The New York Times obituary concluded, "In an era when organized crime meant exploitation and violence, Stephanie St. Clair created something unprecedented, a criminal organization that made its community stronger, safer, and more prosperous." The day the Italian mob declared war on Harlem, they thought they were fighting a criminal competitor. Instead, they had challenged a community organizer and strategic genius who turned their own weapons against them. Stephanie St. Clair bankrupted the 5 families not through superior firepower, but through superior thinking. She proved that the most dangerous enemy of organized crime wasn't law enforcement, it was organized community.